Demo, not for broadcast. Property of WABC New York.
If you're thinking about changing schools, why wait? At Manhattan University, love those guys. You don't have to start over. With transfer-friendly pathways, your credits count, and you keep moving forward. From day one, you're part of Jasper Nation, preparing for the real world. And with New York City just a train away, opportunity is everywhere. Ready to move forward without missing a step? Visit manhattan.edu/transfer and enroll today. Manhattan University. Don't start over. Move forward.
Taxi!
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show. Joining me now is former New Jersey U.S. Senator Bob Torricelli. Bob Torricelli was first elected to the U.S. House, where he served 6 terms before being elected to the U.S. Senate in 1996. While in the U.S. Senate, he served on the Senate Finance, Government Affairs, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, and Rules Committee. But it is today our focus on foreign policy because as a former member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Torricelli is a leading expert on both Middle Eastern and Latin American policy issues. He is a hardline anti-communist, particularly in this hemisphere, where he essentially wrote the current law that enshrines the Cuban embargo. And he is an expert on not only this hemisphere, but has had long relationships and communications with the democratic resistance in Iran. Senator Torricelli, last time you were on the show, we had the greatest ratings I think we've ever had on a Sunday. I'm really delighted that you could join us again.
Thanks, Roger. I look forward to it and always enjoy it. Thanks for having me.
So let's start in an unlikely place, and that is Greenland. Greenland, the president has expressed, obviously publicly, that Greenland plays a strategic role in our national security. He's made it very clear that at a minimum he would like to see the independence of Greenland. And of course, he has said, perhaps jokingly, perhaps not, it should be our next state. You actually are slightly to the right of the president when he ruled out any military action and said that he hoped to gain Greenland through negotiation. Tell us about the strategic importance of Greenland, why this isn't just jingoism. There's a legitimate reason why Greenland should be under U.S. control.
Well, first, I really regret that the debate about Greenland so quickly became both partisan and personal, because somehow the strategic interest of the United States was overshadowed in what became a nasty and simplistic debate. American concern with the Greenland goes back 200 years. This has always been a concern that this massive piece of land controlling the Northwest Passage and access to the Arctic was depopulated and was really not under anyone's military control. The arguments that I would make today for Greenland are not any different than FDR made in 1942 when the United States invaded and occupied Greenland because of concern about it falling into German hands. A foreign adversary with control of Greenland, as I say, not only would control water passages through the Northwest and to the Arctic, but would be a massive advantage as controlling air access because of possible bases. It cannot be in foreign hands. My view is what got lost in this is, if I had been advising the president, it would have been this. In the 21st century, first of all, there should be no colonies in North America. The idea of having a European colony in North America in the year 2025 is absurd. And second, while we all agree in the will of people to determine their own futures, the fact of the matter is, for all practical purposes, Greenland is unpopulated. There's 50,000 people, so there's probably 25,000 adults. The population is falling by 20% per decade. There is no population. That's less people than in a small New Jersey town. So the question is, what does this mean for American security? And I think it's central. Now, add to that the fact that we are in a desperate situation, and I'm not overstating it, with these rare materials. Let's just call a spade a spade. The United States went eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese on processors for artificial intelligence versus rare materials, and we gave in. We gave them the NVIDIA chips in order to keep the flowing of rare material. If we are going to defend this country and be economically competitive, we need these rare earth minerals. Greenland has them. The United States has a limited supply, and it just adds on to what otherwise, I think, militarily is a compelling situation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about this. We have been asleep at the switch as the Chinese have gotten access and control of rare earth minerals in Africa, in South America, in Central America, in Eastern Europe, and elsewhere in Asia. President Trump has a very aggressive task force, and we are now openly competing in this marketplace, but we are definitely playing catch-up ball. As I said earlier on the show, both Alberta and Saskatchewan, where you have active secessionist movements, both of which could become independent, are both very rich sources of rare earth minerals. In fact, the greatest single depository of potash in the world happens to be in Saskatchewan. So I think you identified...
It is in Canada. And Roger, just so your audience understands, this isn't a question that we couldn't make a cell phone. We couldn't make a jet engine or electronics for a fighter plane. We couldn't make a missile. We could not defend the United States. In the Second World War, the Japanese were able to control the supply of rubber to the United States. We panicked because we wouldn't be able to make vehicles. This is 100 times more important. And honestly, if I were sitting across the table right now from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Joe Biden, I would be saying, what the hell were you thinking? Who was asleep at the switch here? The Chinese have a 90% chokehold on the processing of these minerals. 90%. Their foot is on our throat. I don't know how we got here, but I know that we have to do some unusual things in policy to get out of it.
The same people who decided that we should have many of our most popular and most effective, most necessary pharmaceuticals made in China, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Exactly right. No one was paying attention. But on the issue of Greenland, it goes back to you almost couldn't make this up. So the European position, as I take it, is if the United States were to claim Greenland because it's vital for our joint economic future, the United States and Europe, that it be developed, and second, for our own defense of the Arctic and the Northwest, they would punish us by breaking up NATO. I mean, you almost couldn't make this up. So let me get this right.
Make my day. You don't
like our policy, so you're not going to allow us to pay for your defense anymore.
Denmark, first of all, doesn't have the resources to defend Greenland. The economics, the quality of life in Greenland are not good because they can't finance their colony in our hemisphere. And as you correctly pointed out, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, a Democrat, and Dwight Eisenhower all expressed concerns about the national security aspects of Greenland. I think and
honestly, Roger, to this day, I've actually, as one who loves American history and studies it for a lifetime, I don't really know why Harry Truman let it go back. But I would wager this, and I'd love to know from an FDR scholar, Roosevelt was so anti-colonialism that my guess is, had he not died in April 1945, it would not have gone back to Denmark. He was determined the Europeans were not going to reclaim colonial territory.
So let us now move, if we can, to Venezuela, where Donald Trump pulled off a stunning law enforcement action backed by the U.S. military. Not regime change, as we saw under some of his predecessors, but a surgical operation to go in by night and arrest the Venezuelan strongman Nicolás Maduro, but leaving intact, at least for the time being, the Marxist government there. Bob, what do you make of all of this?
Well, first, this can never be discussed without Democrats or Republicans, right or left, acknowledging in our lifetime it was the most brilliant military law enforcement operation that I've ever seen. 200 aircraft decapitating a Marxist narco-terrorist regime on the ground for 3.5 minutes without a single American casualty. I believe if you had taken this script to a Hollywood producer, they would have told you to do a rewrite because it wasn't realistic. So leaving the policy aside for a moment, just in the continued admiration for the American military and our special forces, the operation is simply without peer. As a matter of policy, I'm completely supportive. Maduro, not simply by his narco-terrorism, helping to flood the United States, and by the way, even more Europe with narcotics, but also his embrace of the Iranian regime, his continued reliance and invitation of the Chinese to become active. I understand people do not want the United States in foreign ventures. I understand people want us less involved overseas, but we can't defend America at our shores either. This was going to become a larger problem. Something had to happen, and I think it was brilliantly done.
I think this is President Trump's great skill. He projects American power, but he does so in a limited but effective way. We saw it in his attacks on the nuclear weapons development programs in Iran. We saw it here in Venezuela. No boots on the ground, no American casualties, no long-term commitments to a land war. This is very different than what we saw under previous presidents. And it bridges the gap within the Republican Party between the neocons who want to see a hard line in Iran, want to see a hard line in Venezuela, and the non-interventionists who want to avoid foreign entanglements. Trump is somewhere there in the middle. He will always protect American interests. But I guess the larger question here is, what does this mean for the Cubans? No one has been more effective in fighting the brutal Cuban regime than you have in your days in the U.S. Senate, and outspoken about it since then. What does this Venezuelan development mean for the regime in Cuba?
Well, if you'll remember back into the 1990s when we passed the Cuban Democracy Act and ended basically Western financial intercourse with Cuba, we rightfully believed the regime would not survive the turn of the century because of the economic pressure. We were not wrong under the circumstances. What rescued Castro at the time in Cuban communism was Venezuelan oil. Had there been no Chavez and no sale of oil to Cuba, the regime wouldn't have survived. So it now begs the question, without that oil, what happens to Cuba? Now, the press will write, well, okay, it means that the lights are going out in Havana, they can't make electricity, they have no oil, but they'll survive. It's not just that they can't make electricity. The Cubans were getting oil from Venezuela, but they weren't using it necessarily for the Cuban people. They were taking it and reselling it at a profit on the world market and getting cash. So they've lost the oil for power, but they've also lost the cash. And whether they can survive that, I have real doubts. I think the clock has now been reset back to 1995. And if I had to bet on the next big geopolitical change in the world, it would be the fall of the government in Havana.
There you go, Cuba Libre. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Senator Bob Torricelli, former member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You're listening to The Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. And don't go away, because we'll be back with more of Senator Torricelli on the other side. If you're just tuning in, we're continuing our conversation with Senator Bob Torricelli, who was elected to the U.S. Senate initially in 1996, considered a leading expert on both Middle Eastern and Latin American policy due to his service on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, we now have to turn our view to a subject on which you are indeed expert, and that is Iran. You have long been an outspoken advocate for the democratic forces in Iran and against the brutal regime there. We learned just this week that the estimated number of deaths at the hands of the Ayatollahs is far, far higher than we thought it was. How is this all going to play out?
Well, first, Roger, I understand some of the divisions in America about policy going forward. So let's start with this. I think we all accept the change of government in Iran is up to the Iranian people. And the sacrifices that are going to be coming in coming weeks and months is going to be from Iranians. But we can't conclude that this is not in the strategic interest of the United States. I strongly believe you do not sacrifice American lives or American fortune unless it is in the strategic interest of our country and narrowly defined interests. But Iran not getting a nuclear weapon, Iran not getting ballistic missiles that can attack Europe and someday the United States, not funding Hezbollah that attack American ships and American soldiers. These people, this regime in Iran has cost hundreds, if not thousands, of American lives. So decapitating it, having regime change is in our national interest. But I think the president seems to understand, as I think most of us understand, that does not mean invading Iran. It doesn't mean sending an army to Iran. But if we can do things to tip things over the edge, and that is hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets of Iranian cities to topple this regime, somewhere between 5,000 and 12,000 have been murdered by their government. If in the coming days Donald Trump can hit targets of the Revolutionary Guards, their barracks, their bases, their weapon systems, and tip this over and do it without American soldiers on the ground, but help the people on the streets, it will be a worthwhile endeavor because there is an opposition, a democratic opposition, that is prepared to seize power and realign Iran with the civilized world and their nuclear program and the funding of terrorism and bring in a secular democratic government. So if we can help from the sidelines by giving it a push, I hope we do.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. The answer is not to go from theocracy back to a monarchy. I realize a lot of what I think is largely AstroTurf support for bringing back the son of the Shah. I think our betrayal of the Shah was a foreign policy mistake, but the Shah was equally brutal during his reign. The answer here is a Democrat.
You're right. That's not going to solve it. That's not going to solve anything.
No, but it is you. But as you know, it is used by the regime as a false flag, is to say, "Oh, you want to return to the Shah." It is actually used against us. By the way, we will be flooded with bots. We will be flooded with bots this afternoon attacking us for questioning the legitimate claim of the return of the House of Pahlavi. That is most definitely, in my opinion, not the answer. But
by the way, Roger, some of the videos coming out of Iran are showing people chanting for the return of the Shah. If you actually speak with someone who speaks Farsi and you watch it, that's not what people are saying at all. They're dubbing it over people's voices. The principal support for the movement to bring back the Shah is coming from the regime itself, because they're creating this false choice that you've got the Ayatollah or the Shah. And the people of Iran do not want to go back to the dictatorship of the Shah. But that's not the choice. There's a democratic choice. The Shah's son is just being used, and the United States needs to be very careful not to fall into that trap.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Rudy Giuliani, my longtime friend, been very, very articulate on this point, has suffered the same incoming from those who insist that only the return of the Shah would be just. We need a democratic elections, ultimately, in Iran. But I agree with you. I don't think the president has to do much. I do think some very strategic strikes, airstrikes, but the idea of boots on the ground or any kind of fulsome or full-fledged invasion, I don't think is on his dance card. I think highly, highly unlikely. All right, I'm afraid we have to wrap it up there. I want to thank our guest, a former New Jersey Senator Bob Torricelli, former member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for sharing his expertise with us today on Greenland, Venezuela, Cuba, and the situation in Iran. Thank you again for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show, where we talk politics, news, history, style, culture, and food. And until next Sunday, God bless you and Godspeed.
Listen to this podcast now on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Polonis.
I'm Dr. Peggy Polonis. Join me on each episode where I unravel the story that shaped leaders, tracing the thread that led them where they are today. Because leadership isn't born in adulthood. And thank you once again for joining us on the Leadership Thread, education, ethics, and sustainability.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.